I did made him love me back. I've been living with my older sister Mia since I graduated from college. She got this 2-bedroom apartment near downtown and offered me the spare room while I figured out my career. Mia's basically perfect. She volunteers at the animal shelter on weekends, brings home leftover baked goods from her office for me, and never complains when I forget to buy toilet paper. The only problem was her best friend Luke. They met at a work conference 3 years ago and became instant friends. At first I thought he was just another one of her work buddies who came over for wine and reality TV. But Luke was different. He fixed our garbage disposal without being asked. He remembered I was lactose intolerant and brought oat milk lattes when he visited. He had this way of laughing at my dumb jokes that made me feel like the funniest person alive. I fell hard. The thing is, I was pretty sure Luke was in love with Mia. He texted her good morning every single day. He drove 40 minutes to bring her soup when she had a cold. He memorized her coffee order and work schedule. When she talked, he watched her like she was explaining the meaning of life. Mia was completely oblivious. She'd tell me how lucky she was to have such a good friend while I died inside. She even tried setting him up with her coworker once, and he made up some excuse about focusing on his career. For months, I tortured myself watching them together. Luke would come over for dinner and sit next to Mia on the couch while I took the armchair. He'd help her cook while I set the table. They had inside jokes from work that I didn't understand. The worst part was the holiday season. Luke spent Thanksgiving with us because his family lived across the country. He brought flowers for Mia and helped her make the turkey. I made the mashed potatoes alone in the corner like a sad ghost. He stayed until midnight helping her clean up, while I pretended to be tired and went to bed. I could hear them laughing in the kitchen and wanted to scream. One Friday, Mia went on a date with a guy from her gym. Luke showed up at our place even though he knew she was out. He said he left his charger there, but I knew that was bull because I saw it in his car earlier. He stayed and watched a movie with me, sitting on the opposite end of the couch like I had a disease. The whole time, he kept checking his phone and asking when Mia would be back. When she finally texted, she was staying at the guy's place. Luke left immediately. That's when I snapped. The next week, I started my plan. Every time Luke came over, I made sure to be in the living room first. When he sat down, I'd sit right next to him. Not creepy close, just normal friend distance. When Mia cooked, I'd help while Luke set the table. I started texting him memes during the day, nothing flirty, just funny stuff I knew he'd like. He always responded right away with laughing emojis or comments that kept the conversation going. I found out he loved this one TV show Mia hated, so I started watching it and texting him about each episode. Soon, we had our own inside jokes. When he came over, he started bringing 2 oat milk lattes instead of 1. He'd ask me about my job interviews and remember the details. He fixed my laptop when it crashed and refused to let me pay him. But he still sat next to Mia at dinner. He still texted her first every morning. Then came Mia's birthday party. She invited like 20 people to this bar downtown. Luke was obviously there, hovering around her all night. He bought her drinks, made sure she didn't lose her purse, and kept taking pictures of her with her friends. After a few drinks, Mia started talking about how she wanted to find Luke a girlfriend, because he was too good to be single. She literally grabbed our friend Hannah and tried to introduce them. I watched from the bar, downing my 3rd vodka tonic. I pulled him outside for air, and he just exploded. He went on about how Mia didn't see him that way, how he'd been trying for 3 years, how it killed him watching her date other guys. He said he'd basically been her boyfriend without any benefits. He said he did everything right, but she only saw him as a friend. Then he said something that stopped my heart. He said at least I understood him. He said I was the only person who really got him anymore. He said spending time with me was the only thing keeping him sane. He said our texts were the best part of his day. Before I could respond, Mia came outside looking for us. She was drunk and happy, talking about how glad she was that her 2 favorite people were friends. Luke looked at her with a defeated expression. That's when I did it. I told Mia that Luke had something important to tell her. Luke went pale. Mia got all serious, grabbing his hands and asking if everything was okay. He started stammering, looking between us. So I helped him out. I said Luke had feelings for someone at the party and needed advice. Mia immediately went into best friend mode, demanding to know who it was. She started listing every woman there. When she got to Hannah, Luke shook his head. When she jokingly said my name, he froze. The silence was so loud I could hear the music from inside. Mia's face went through like 10 different emotions. Then she started laughing. Not mean laughing, just surprised. She told Luke I'd had a crush on him for months. She said she'd been trying to give us space to figure it out, but we were both too stupid to notice. I couldn't move. Mia threw her arms around both of us at the same time, squeezing tight enough that I felt Luke's shoulder press against mine. She was laughing and saying something about how she'd been waiting forever for us to get our heads out of our butts. Luke's face looked like someone had just told him the sky was actually green. He kept looking between me and Mia like he was trying to solve a math problem that didn't make sense. That's when it hit me. Mia thought Luke's feelings had always been about me. She had no idea he'd spent 3 years in love with her. She genuinely believed this whole time he'd been into me, and we were both too dumb to notice. The music from inside the bar got louder as someone opened the door. A group of people walked past us laughing. Mia pulled back and wiped her eyes, still grinning. She grabbed my hand and then Luke's hand and dragged us back toward the entrance. I looked at Luke, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. The bar was packed and sweaty and smelled like beer and perfume. Mia didn't let go of our hands until we were back at the table where Hannah and 2 other friends were sitting. She announced it like she was revealing a surprise party. She said Luke and I were finally getting together and everyone needed to celebrate with us. Hannah screamed and jumped up to hug me. The other 2 friends started clapping and whistling. Someone ordered shots. I stood there feeling like I was watching this happen to someone else. Luke was next to me. frozen with this weird half smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. Hannah asked how long we'd been secretly in love, and Mia answered for us, saying months, maybe longer. She said she'd noticed the way we looked at each other when we thought no one was watching. She said she'd been giving us space to figure it out on our own, but clearly we needed a push. More people came over to congratulate us. Someone took a picture of me and Luke standing next to each other. He put his arm around my shoulders because everyone was watching and it felt stiff and wrong. Luke leaned down and said something in my ear, but I couldn't hear him over the music. He nodded toward the hallway where the bathrooms were. I followed him through the crowd, past people dancing and groups taking selfies. The hallway was quieter and smelled like cleaning products. He stopped near the end where it was darker, and the music was just a dull thump through the walls. He looked at me and his face was completely lost. He asked what just happened. His voice came out rough like he'd been yelling. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. He asked if I knew Mia thought this whole time his feelings were about me. He ran his hand through his hair and turned away, then turned back. He asked if I planned this somehow. The accusation in his voice made my stomach hurt. I said no, I didn't plan for Mia to think that. I said I didn't know she'd been watching us and reading things into it. But even as I said it, I knew part of me had hoped for exactly this. Just not like this. I pulled him further down the hallway into a corner where two walls met. The party kept going without us somewhere on the other side of the building. I told him the truth because there was no point in lying anymore. I said Mia never knew he loved her. I said she genuinely thought his feelings were always directed at me, that all those texts and coffee runs and 3 years of devotion looked like friendship to her. I said now we were in this weird situation where correcting her would hurt everyone. Luke stared at me for a long time. His jaw was tight and his eyes looked wet, but maybe that was just the dim lighting. He asked what I expected him to do now. I said I didn't know. He leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. A girl walked past us to get to the bathroom and gave us a weird look. Luke waited until she was gone before he spoke again. He said he wasn't sure what he felt anymore. He said the past few weeks with me had been really good, better than he wanted to admit. He said when he was texting me or hanging out watching our show, he wasn't thinking about Mia. He said maybe that meant something, or maybe it just meant he was desperate for someone to actually want him back. His voice cracked on the last part. I wanted to touch his arm or hug him, but I didn't know if I was allowed to anymore. He said he needed time to think. He said we should talk tomorrow when we were both sober and could figure this out properly. I agreed because what else could I do? He walked back toward the main room without waiting for me. I stood in the hallway for another minute trying to make my face look normal before I followed. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon. My head hurt and my mouth tasted like vodka and regret. I put on sweatpants and shuffled into the kitchen. Mia was making pancakes and eggs and bacon like it was Christmas morning. She turned around when she heard me and her whole face lit up. She asked how I was feeling and winked like we were sharing a secret. Luke was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, looking like he hadn't slept. Mia put a plate in front of me piled with food. She sat down across from us and kept grinning at me like I'd won the lottery. She asked when Luke and I were going on our first official date. She said she wanted all the details about how we were going to do this. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text from Luke even though he was sitting right there. It said he wanted to talk later today. I told Mia we were taking things slow. She said that was smart and mature, but I could tell she was disappointed she wouldn't get to plan our whole relationship right now. Luke left after breakfast saying he had errands to run. Mia cleaned up the kitchen while telling me stories about how she'd noticed us getting closer. She said she'd been rooting for us. The guilt sat in my chest like a rock. Around 2 in the afternoon, Mia left for her volunteer shift at the animal shelter. She'd be gone for at least 4 hours. Luke texted asking if he could come over. I said yes. He showed up 20 minutes later looking tired but more put together than he had at breakfast. We sat on the couch in the living room, the same couch where he used to sit next to Mia while I took the armchair. He started talking before I could. He said he'd been up all night thinking about everything. He said he spent 3 years chasing someone who didn't want him romantically. He said with Mia, he was always trying to prove himself, always wondering if he was doing enough, always feeling like he was one step behind. He said lately being with me felt easy and natural in a way it never did with Mia. He said our conversations flowed without him having to think about every word. He said he looked forward to my texts more than hers. He said maybe that meant his feelings for Mia were about the idea of her, not the real person. I asked if he was sure or if he was just trying to make the best of a bad situation. He said he didn't know for certain, but he wanted to try. He said we could date for real and see what happened. He said if it didn't work out, at least we'd know. I felt like I should confess everything right then. I should tell him about my plan to position myself closer to him, about how I'd deliberately chosen the show he liked, about how I'd pushed him to reveal his feelings knowing it might blow up in exactly this way. But I didn't. I said okay. I said we could try. He leaned over and kissed me. It was soft and careful, and it made my whole body feel warm. But underneath the warmth was this cold feeling like I was getting everything I wanted through lies. He left an hour later after we'd talked about logistics and how to handle things with Mia. When the door closed behind him, I sat on the couch alone wondering if I was a terrible person. The next few days were weird. Mia kept asking questions about me and Luke that I didn't know how to answer. She wanted to know if we'd kissed yet, if we were making things official, if we were going to tell people. Her excitement made the guilt worse because she was genuinely happy and supportive. She kept saying how perfect we were together. She said she'd been worried about Luke being lonely and now he'd found someone who really got him. She talked about double dates once she found someone to date. Every time she said something nice, I wanted to confess everything. But confessing would hurt her and ruin things with Luke and make me look like a manipulative person, which I guess I was. 2 weeks into dating Luke, things felt more normal. We went to dinner and movies. He came over when Mia was home and we all watched TV together like before, except now he sat next to me instead of her. But I started noticing things. He still texted Mia good morning sometimes, just not every day. When he came over, he'd bring her coffee along with mine, just less frequently. He'd still help her with stuff around the apartment without being asked. I knew they were just friends. I knew this was normal. But it made me irrationally jealous anyway. I'd watch them laugh at inside jokes from work and feel this ugly twist in my stomach. I hated that I was turning into the insecure girlfriend who couldn't handle her boyfriend having female friends. Especially when that female friend was my own sister. Then Mia started dating someone. She came home from the gym one day talking about Isla Chapman, who'd asked her out. Suddenly Mia was going on dates 3 times a week and coming home giddy, texting constantly, talking about Isla like she'd discovered something amazing. I felt relieved that she was distracted and wouldn't notice if things with Luke were weird. But I also felt guilty that I was relieved. What kind of person was I that my first reaction to my sister's happiness was relief that she wouldn't be paying attention to my relationship drama? Luke texted me on Thursday afternoon saying something came up and he had to cancel our dinner plans. I stared at my phone sitting on the couch where we'd made out the night before. I texted back asking what happened. He said Mia needed help moving furniture for a surprise she was planning for Isla. The words made my stomach twist. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on asking if he could come over after. He said it would probably be late and he didn't want to wake me. I threw my phone on the couch cushion and went to my room. An hour later, I heard Luke's voice in the living room talking to Mia about where to put the bookshelf. I stayed in my room with the door closed, listening to them laugh while they rearranged furniture. When I finally came out to get water, Luke smiled at me like everything was normal. I asked if he was staying for dinner since he was already here. Mia jumped in saying they were ordering pizza and I should join them. I said I wasn't hungry and went back to my room. Luke texted me asking if I was okay. I didn't respond. He knocked on my door 20 minutes later. I opened it and he stood there looking confused. I asked why he canceled our plans to help Mia move furniture. He said she asked him this morning and it was important. I pointed out that our dinner reservation was made 3 days ago. He got this defensive look and said Mia was his best friend and sometimes she needed help. I asked if he was always going to drop everything for her. He stepped back like I'd slapped him. He said that wasn't fair and I knew how important their friendship was. I told him it felt like he was still prioritizing her over me. He ran his hand through his hair and said he couldn't believe we were having this conversation. He reminded me that Mia was there first and she'd always be in his life. I said I wasn't asking him to cut her out. He asked what I was asking then. I didn't have an answer that didn't sound crazy. He left without kissing me goodbye. I couldn't sleep that night replaying the fight in my head. The next morning I texted Luke saying I was sorry and asking if we could talk. He came over while Mia was at work. We sat on opposite ends of the couch where this whole thing started. I apologized for making him feel like he had to choose. He nodded but didn't say anything right away. I admitted the fight showed me something ugly about myself. I told him I wanted him to pick me over Mia completely, and that wasn't realistic or fair. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. He said he needed me to trust that what he felt for Mia was about an idea he built up in his head. He explained that the real friendship they had was different from the romantic fantasy he'd been chasing. I asked how I was supposed to know the difference. He looked at me and said because he chose to be here right now instead of avoiding the hard conversation. He reached for my hand and squeezed it. He said if he was still hung up on Mia, he would have used the fight as an excuse to run. I squeezed back and felt something loosen in my chest. Katie McNeil from my job search network called me 2 days later about an interview at her company. She said they needed someone to start in 3 weeks, and she immediately thought of me. I spent the next week preparing, researching the company, practicing answers to interview questions. Luke and I barely saw each other except for quick texts. He sent me good luck messages and offered to help me practice, but I was too stressed to make time. On Wednesday, he asked if I wanted to get dinner, and I said I needed to prep more. Thursday, he suggested coffee, and I said I was meeting with Katie to go over interview tips. By Friday, I realized we hadn't seen each other in 6 days. When we finally met up Saturday afternoon, something felt different. The distance had taken the pressure off. We got coffee and walked around downtown without the weight of our fight hanging over us. He asked about the interview and actually listened instead of checking his phone. I asked about his week and he told me about a project at work that was driving him crazy. We laughed about stupid things like the guy at the coffee shop who couldn't work the espresso machine. It felt normal in a way it hadn't before. The interview was Tuesday morning at 9. I wore the blazer Mia let me borrow and showed up 15 minutes early. Katie met me in the lobby and walked me through the office. The interview lasted an hour and I left feeling like I'd actually done well for once. Katie texted me that afternoon saying the hiring manager loved me. 3 days later, they offered me the job. I called Luke immediately and he said we had to celebrate. He picked me up Friday night and took me to this Italian place near his apartment. We ordered wine even though it was overpriced, and he made me tell him every detail of the interview. Then he started talking about growing up in Oregon with his 2 brothers. He told me about the time they tried to build a treehouse and his youngest brother fell and broke his arm. He told me about his mom teaching him to cook because his dad couldn't boil water. I realized I was learning things about him that had nothing to do with Mia. I wasn't thinking about manipulation or guilt or whether I deserved to be there. I was just sitting across from him laughing at his stories and wanting to know more. When he walked me to my door later, I kissed him and felt like I was falling for the real person, not the idea I'd built up in my head. Mia announced at breakfast 2 weeks later that Isla was moving in. She was practically bouncing in her chair talking about how they'd been dating 4 months, and it felt right. Then she looked at me and said I'd need to find my own place in 2 months. My coffee mug stopped halfway to my mouth. She kept talking about how excited she was, but I couldn't hear her over the panic in my head. Living with Mia had been my safety net since graduation. I had a job now, but finding an apartment and living alone felt terrifying. Mia noticed my face and asked if I was okay. I said I was happy for her and excused myself to my room. Luke called an hour later because Mia had texted him worried about me. I told him I was freaking out about finding a place. He suggested we look at apartments near each other so we could hang out without the pressure of moving in together. The idea made sense and calmed me down enough to start looking at listings online. I spent the next week touring apartments after work. Most of them were too expensive or too far from my new job. On Thursday, I walked into a building near Luke's neighborhood and ran into someone in the lobby. He said my name and I looked up to see Liam Bowers, Luke's coworker. He was holding his gym bag and asked what I was doing there. I explained I was apartment hunting. He said he lived on the 3rd floor and the building was great. We rode the elevator together and he asked how Luke was doing. I said he was good. Liam smiled and said Luke seemed way happier lately. Then he added that it was good to see because Luke used to talk about Mia constantly at work. My stomach dropped. Liam kept talking about how Luke would come in every Monday with stories about hanging out with her over the weekend. He said everyone at the office knew Luke was in love with her. The elevator doors opened and Liam said goodbye. I walked to the apartment viewing but couldn't focus on anything. The confirmation that Luke's feelings for Mia were real and deep made me spiral. I kept wondering if I was just the available option now that she was seriously dating someone. I showed up at Luke's apartment that night without calling first. He opened the door in sweatpants looking surprised. I asked if I could come in. He stepped aside and I walked to his living room. I turned around and asked if he was really over Mia or if I was just convenient. He froze with his hand still on the doorknob. I told him about running into Liam and what he said. Luke closed the door and came to sit on the couch. He was quiet for a long time. Then he admitted he probably needed to let go of Mia before he could see me clearly. I felt tears starting and blinked them back. He reached for my hand and said that didn't make what we had less real. I pulled my hand away and asked how I was supposed to believe that. He said because he was being honest instead of lying to make me feel better. He said he could pretend the past 3 years didn't happen, but that wouldn't change the truth. We sat there not talking for a while. Finally, he said relationships were messy and rarely started in perfect ways. He asked if I thought my feelings for him were pure from the beginning. I admitted they weren't. He said we were both flawed people who did questionable things to get here. He said the question wasn't how we started, but whether we wanted to keep going. I looked at him and asked if he did. He said yes without hesitating. I said I did too. We talked for 3 more hours about everything. About how he built Mia into someone she wasn't. About how I manipulated situations to get close to him. About how neither of us were perfect, but we were trying to be honest now. When I left his apartment after midnight, I felt closer to him than I ever had. I found an apartment the next week. It was 15 minutes from Luke's place and 10 minutes from my new job. The landlord showed me around and I signed the lease the same day. Sitting in the rental office with the pen in my hand felt like the first adult decision I'd made that wasn't about Luke or Mia. Dom Rollins from my new workplace offered to help me move when I mentioned it at lunch. He was one of those genuinely nice people who didn't know anything about my messy history. We spent the day carrying boxes, and he told me about his boyfriend and their 3 cats. By the time everything was in my new place, I had a real friend who knew me as just me. Mia and I went to dinner alone the night before Isla officially moved in. We sat at our favorite Thai place and ordered too much food like always. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. She said she was proud of how I'd grown up this year. I felt my throat get tight. She said she always knew I had a crush on Luke, but didn't realize how serious it was. She said she was glad we found each other even if the timing was weird. I almost told her everything right then. About how I manipulated the situation. About how Luke was in love with her first. About how guilty I felt every single day. But telling her now would only hurt her and wouldn't change anything that already happened. Instead, I thanked her for being supportive. I told her I was working on being a better person. It was the most honest thing I could say. She squeezed my hand across the table and said she loved me. I squeezed back and said I loved her too. We paid the check and walked back to the apartment together. She talked about Isla's quirks and how happy she felt. I listened and smiled and felt the words I almost said sitting heavy in my chest. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thought about how some truths are more harmful than helpful. Luke texted asking how dinner went. I told him it was good. He sent back a heart emoji and said he was proud of me. I fell asleep feeling like I'd made the right choice even if it didn't feel completely honest. 6 months passed. Luke and I fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly normal. We argued about whose turn it was to buy groceries. We debated whether to watch his show or mine on Friday nights. We split dinner costs and took turns picking restaurants. He left his socks on my bathroom floor and I hogged the blankets when he stayed over. We had inside jokes and comfortable silences. We knew each other's coffee orders and work schedules. Some days I forgot how we started. Other days the guilt hit me out of nowhere while we were doing something completely ordinary like folding laundry or grocery shopping. I'd remember that I manipulated situations to make this happen. That Luke spent 3 years wanting someone else. That Mia still didn't know the full truth. But then Luke would make a stupid joke or kiss my forehead or text me something funny from work, and I'd remember that what we had now was real even if how we got here was messy. I learned that relationships don't need perfect beginnings to become something good. That people can grow and change and choose each other every day. That guilt and happiness can exist in the same space. That love is complicated and rarely follows the clean narrative we expect.